I looked at podcasting for students as part of a project. In this little video, we're going to go over some resources and tips you might need, as well as some samples of the products that my students created. Podcasts are ideal to use for student projects in place of presentations, in place of written papers, and anytime you might need to hear them talk. So for languages or something like that. All right, so here are the resources that I gave my students. So the first thing is I had students, I had given them an option for a couple of years to make podcast as review. And I figured out really quickly that some of them didn't know what a podcast was and what it should sound like. So I decided that I should kind of make them listen to a podcast and pick out elements of how it's formatted. And so I specifically, for this project, wanted them to model their podcast after this podcast, Science Versus.
I'm Wendy Zuckerman, and you're listening to Science Versus from Gimlet Media. This is the show that pits facts against fluffy white bears.
So I had my students listen to episodes of it and pick out some different elements of it. I gave them some guiding questions for when they were listening so that they knew what to put in their podcasts. So you could either have them listen to a podcast that you want to format yours after, or have them, or pick a few that you know are really well done. Then the next thing is make them plan it. If you don't make them plan it, and if you don't check their plan, then you get really long rambling things that don't actually cover the content and the skills that you wanted to assess them on, and then it's not really useful for anybody. So I gave my students a template to plan it, and it kind of, in this case, it mimicked the format of the podcast that I wanted them to create. And then, especially if you plan to have this be published to a platform where the general public can access it, make them submit a script to you. So over here, I gave them a template. They had to submit a script to me, and I had to check it and okay it before they could record and publish their podcast. Because this was something that we were submitting to a publicly available site, and I wanted to make sure that we were putting quality work out there. Once I started looking at these scripts that they were submitting, I realized that they were playing the parts of research scientists and giving their interpretations of scientific papers that they had read, and not anywhere saying like, hey, we're high school students, like this could be maybe not 100% correct. So I did make my students put in a disclaimer, and I put in a written disclaimer on the whole podcast that these are high school students and they don't have their PhDs just yet.
Disclaimer: this podcast was written and recorded by high school students. We do not have any sort of higher education experience that qualifies us to spout this information. Thank you, and enjoy.
To record a podcast, you can go really low-tech and simple, and they can record on their phone, or they can record with like a pop filter and a more advanced microphone. It just really depends on the quality of audio that you're going for. And then they need to edit it. Again, there's tons of different audio editing platforms. I left it open to students, and our students are pretty tech savvy. So they're going to figure out this editing software a lot faster than I can teach it to them. So I gave them absolutely no instruction on this. I gave them some suggestions of things that they could use, but no instruction at all, and they figured it out. And then the last thing is to publish. There's a lot of different platforms where you can publish podcasts for free, such as Anchor and SoundCloud. I chose Anchor because there is no limit on the amount of minutes that you can have published for free. I think with SoundCloud they have a limit. Also, Anchor automatically publishes to several other platforms like iTunes and the Google Play and Spotify, I think. So what I did is I made a class account and I just gave students the password, which reduced my workload so that I did not have to go through and upload each individual recording. However, it depends on your students and how much you trust that they have actually recorded what you approved in their script. Because really, if you give them the password to it, they can realistically upload whatever they want. And I'm probably not going to listen to it for a day or two. So anybody can access that, and that's representing our school. We have a podcast called Apes Versus.
I'm Ethan Godwin, and you're listening to Apes Versus.